Welcome to this week's ILBI Talks. This week we have Allen Tinkham from Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra is joining us. And Allen, I met Allen 2 years ago, I believe. The first time I ended up working with you was through Chicago Composers Orchestra. But I also knew that you had a strong affiliation with Chicago over the last 2 decades, teaching, conducting, and forgive me for not knowing, but I guess I can ask the real life human being in the room with me. Can you tell us everything in the cracks and everything in between that formed the Allen Tinkham that sits here today?
Well, boy, without taking all afternoon to fill in those cracks, I would just say that, I don't know, my path was, I had a fairly winding path. In that, for a long time, I wasn't sure what I wanted to play. And then I knew I wanted to be a musician, but I wasn't really sure how or what that necessarily was going to mean in my future. I knew I wanted to be good at it, but I wasn't somebody who grew up dreaming of, conducting certain orchestras or playing certain pieces. I just wanted to be a good musician.
Okay. Do you come from a musical family?
Yes, both of my parents are public school music teachers. My dad was high school band director for 20 years and then a supervisor. My mom did at various points in her career, middle school, choral and general, elementary general, and then she was the chorus director at my old high school for over 15 years.
So were they surprised when you were a teacher?
They were, I don't think they were at all surprised that I had teacher in me, in my blood, because they certainly do. I think that even they would consider themselves much more teachers than musicians. I mean, they're musical people, of course, but they were, teachers who played music.
Okay.
They actually tried to push me away from music as a profession. I was, typical high school honor student. I liked a lot of my academic classes, and I knew that I wanted to play music, but I wasn't sure where career-wise it should go. And they said, you're a smart guy. Why don't you go do something, secure, like engineering, or something STEMmy. They wanted me to do something STEMmy, even in those days before we said STEM. Sure. But I got what my teacher in high school used to call the disease, which is really funny now that we're living in a pandemic, because that was the disease when you decide, you just want to play music, you don't want to do other things.
So I imagine you're a multi-instrumentalist of some shape or form?
Yes. I always think as a conductor, you get along best with the players whose jobs you best understand. And so, the more instruments you can know, the better. I studied the horn for 10 years. I started middle school as a horn player, and it was my identity for most of that time. I went through a terrible embouchure change as a high school senior, and so I'm very sensitive to those issues. I understand how people who haven't gone through it could have no idea how you can accidentally turn a technical problem into total performance neurosis, but I have gone through this, so I understand.
Yeah.
But then I ended up a double bassist primarily, and I still consider this my primary instrument. And this is because while I was studying the horn, of course, I like most kids growing up in the 80s, I listened to a lot of pop music and a lot of what was popular rock and roll in those days. And in fact, everything had a saxophone solo in it, which is why I started out in the 5th grade as a saxophonist.
Okay.
And then it was my middle school director. I got to the 6th grade and he said, we have all these people signed up to play the saxophone. We have no one signed up to play the horn, the oboe, the bassoon, or the tuba. And went home, asked my dad what I should do. He said, well, your teacher is a horn player, and your teacher, when you get to the high school, eventually will be a horn player. So, you'll get their best teaching if you pick the horn. So that was how I became a horn player. It was really just because my teachers happened to play the horn. And of course, what a mind game that is. You don't realize until after, no matter how long you practice it, put it on your face, never totally sure what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And anyway, because I was interested in rock and roll, I wanted a guitar. I thought girls would really like that. And my dad said, I'm not giving you a guitar. So in the 8th grade, I went to visit the high school to ask the director about playing electric bass. So he gave me electric bass to practice over the summer before my freshman year, and I went home, started practicing that. Then I started listening to more jazz and realized that double bass was where it was really at. And so I started doing that, but I didn't start studying legit bass until I was an undergraduate. And then I switched, went to Eastman as bass major.
Okay. There's a lot in that response, and I want to draw on a couple of things. You said when you were picking the horn, your dad said, well, if you pick the horn, your teacher's a horn player, your high school band director is going to be a horn player. You're going to get the best education out of them if you did that. And that draws on a skill that a lot of students, I think, struggle with forming until maybe in college. I certainly struggled with it. And that skill to me is taking advantage of the surroundings that you have and using that community to build yourself and your future the way you want to. So let's rewind the clock and let's go to your first year in CYSO. What did you do to build your community? What did you do to build your dreams, and have you achieved them? Have you achieved some of them? Are some still out there?
First year as music director here at the CYSO, honestly, it was so surreal at the time to suddenly be in a position of real responsibility, because up until then, I was a student and I was an apprentice conductor. I did have a nice opportunity as a graduate student at University of Michigan. There were 2 orchestras of non-music majors, and I became the music director of one and then the other of those, which was amazing experience to have as a master's student. I was auditioning people for the orchestra and choosing programs and running rehearsals, creating, rehearsal schedules. And that experience for me was the beginning of what I think of as my real growth as a conductor, because that was the first time I really had the responsibility for everything that happened on stage. And of course, I graduated Michigan and went to the Oregon Symphony as an apprentice conductor, where I went back to, having fairly little responsibility for what happened on stage, except for when I was conducting.
Yeah.
And even then, when you're an apprentice conductor in front of a major orchestra, you have some control, but it's a whole different level of control than the music director has, and that, other significantly more experienced guest conductors might have. Luckily, the players are very kind to me, and I learned a lot from the experience. But being here, the big thing that changed was I was suddenly the head person responsible for everything that happened on stage, and that was mind-blowing for me. And it was very stressful at first. And I was following a conductor here that I respected very highly. Rosen Milanov is fantastic, extremely important conductor, and it was very difficult for me starting here, thinking, how am I going to be able to replace this distinguished predecessor of mine? And what I realized over the coming years was that nobody really, you don't replace each other. You are different people, and you bring different things. And so it took me a while to figure out what was my thing, what I would bring.
That's huge. We don't replace people. We add to the environment that we're in. What were some of the first big goals that you had when you started at CYSO?
My first big goal was I should say the one goal that I came in with that has always remained is to keep it growing, to make sure that it's continually improving, that the experience is improving for the students, that the level of playing the students are, eventually find in themselves keeps improving, that the music continues to become more difficult, which is easy to overdo, that the programs continue to become more interesting, more varied, more diverse in their elements, the composers we draw upon and the guest artists we draw upon. So all those goals that were there with me at the very beginning lasted, and they're still my goals today. They're still the things that I'm focused on. Like, I will say that I try not to pay too much attention to what other youth orchestras are doing. I have always based what I try and do with the CYSO on what the greatest orchestras in the world are doing. And so Chicago Symphony is always
they're down the street here.
They're right down the street, just a couple of blocks, and they have all the greatest conductors coming through, and they play all the most difficult and most amazing music, and they have fantastic range of contemporary repertoire that they're playing, and so I've always tried as much as possible to bring all those elements to the CYSO, to bring the most important, the pieces that to me are the most important, the most fulfilling, the pieces that bring the experience to the most students, which is why so much of the repertoire is like late romantic, post-romantic repertoire, because we got to keep not just, the woodwinds and horns and trumpets busy, but we got to keep the low brass busy. We got to keep the percussionists, the harpists, the pianists busy. And this tends to require a lot of contemporary repertoire. Especially, there's nothing I enjoy more with the CYSO than tearing into one of the great, 20th century masterpieces of large orchestra repertoire, because I'm looking for pieces that need the entire village. It's the opposite of professional orchestra. They're looking for ways to save money using less people. I'm looking for ways to...
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember I sat in, I think it was with CYSO, and we did Hanson 2.
Right.
That was amazing. And if I remember correctly, there were 3 subs in the low brass section. There was a student playing principal. I can't remember her name, unfortunately. You'll probably remember.
Principal trombone?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, right.
A couple of years ago. And then it was Michael Cox, who now plays in the San Francisco Opera, I believe. Robin Schultz, who plays bass trombone, and I kind of knew through Civic, and myself. And that was just such a, going into that experience and the rehearsals and the concert cycle, I was thinking, wow, this is just going to be such a weird experience and balance of experience in the section. And then we got there, and I mean, the CYSO Orchestra they just blew us away. And it was fun to show up to work and be like, these aren't just any other kids. We can play like we want to, and we can show them and support them with a really, really solid low brass section. So that just comes to mind that,
I am so glad, and I remember that vividly. And that was the concert that we played Karim Rustam's Aleppo songs, right?
Yes,
it was Hanson's Second Symphony and Rustam Aleppo songs. And there's another example. Karim is this now incredibly important Syrian American composer, and I love so many of his pieces. But yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing I get to do here, and this is why it's so much fun. I get to work with people who are mature enough, skilled enough that they can make real music given the right tools, given the right rehearsal experiences, but they're young enough they still care what I think about it. That's fun.
Yeah, that is fun. And you were talking earlier about your goal is wanting to be always to make it a little more capable of an organization as a whole. In your years in the organization, working with students from across the city, and correct me if I'm wrong, but CYSO is traditionally mostly students within the city, or is it also kind of encompassing a lot of the suburbs, like some of the other music programs.
Oh yeah,
in
it's
town.
it's a lot of students from within the city, more so now than when I came 20 years ago. But it definitely students from all over surrounding areas. We've had people coming from as far south as Peoria on a regular basis. We've had students from Peoria. We've had students coming from Iowa, coming from places in Northwest Indiana.
From Iowa, really?
Oh yeah, we've had
wow.
not too many, but
Okay.
yeah, I remember a couple of students we've had who had 5-hour drives each way,
Oh, wow.
coming back and forth to rehearsal. And obviously, it's a tremendous privilege to get to work with people so dedicated that they would put in that kind of time for transportation. But yeah, it's continuing to grow it, continuing to improve it has been so important to me for so many ways. Not just, one way obviously is that as a conductor and teacher, I'm constantly measuring, how much can I grow this ensemble in this many rehearsals on this particular repertoire. And I would say that the most important reason, though, is that these students are all just preparing for the rest of our lives. And this is the biggest difference between working with young people at a place like CYSO and working with a professional orchestra. These young people that I work with are all people who are preparing to do, in some cases, other things besides music. And I tell them all the time, just because you don't want to be a musician with your career doesn't mean that you don't have to do this well, because how many careers do you think there are where you can make the same mistake 4 or 5 times in a row? Nobody's going to have a problem with that. There are no good jobs where you can make the same mistake 4 or 5 times in a row. Nobody has a problem.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are the ones who are trying to go forward in the business of music, which I tell them, first of all, if you have to ask anyone whether you should do it, you should absolutely not do it. And if you want it every day, if it's really important for you to have music in your life every day and you choose to do it, fine, but prepare yourself, because it's not always a pretty business. It's very difficult. It's for some people, it's a life of pain and frustration, and for all of us, to some extent, it's a life of pain and frustration. But right, it certainly can be. But my feeling is, the reason this is so important is because I am preparing them for whatever they are going to experience afterwards, and I am preparing them for whatever reactions they will be able to muster to whatever, cruelty that the universe will throw at them.
Okay. What have you noticed in the students over the years? Like, have trends and inspirations, have trends in work ethic, or their views and what they bring to the organization, has that changed in any general sense?
That is very interesting. When you started asking that question, I was thinking purely technically, and I would say the number one thing is that it is continuously improving. And I'm able to play things with the orchestra now that I was beginning to be able to play 10 years ago, that I wasn't able to play 15 years ago. And this, I think, again, is a monument to what teaching is. It's this passing of information from generation to generation, but each of us takes the information that our teachers give us and then build upon it before we pass it to the next generation. So everything is constantly improving, everything is constantly evolving. And that's why I feel, especially with the advent of the internet and such resources as YouTube, where you can see pretty much any piece you want, in 5 seconds with a couple of keystrokes, you can see it played by the greatest people who ever lived, and other people who might not be so good, and some of those you can learn even more from.
You can.
And it's and of course there's a dark side to that whole. The internet is beautiful as a resource, but of course there is a dark side to what that does to our attention span, and other social media difficulties that some of us have, especially introverts like me.
Sure, absolutely. I relate. Being an introvert, but then being in a classical music industry, you have to be an extrovert to a degree.
To some extent. It's a role we have to learn to play.
Yeah. good way.
I try not to any more than I have to, but
That's good.
you know, what everyone wants to know is how to get ahead. And that's one of the things that, this is something I could talk about. When I see these young people in the orchestra, part of why I feel very aware of what they need, what they want out of this, is because I remember vividly being their age. I remember high school too well.
Okay.
And I remember, you know, a lot of people talking to me like I wasn't very smart because I was young and I didn't know much.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of adults who can't tell the difference between, you know, a young person who doesn't know anything yet and a young person who, you know, like is having more serious problems. But the difficulty is to put yourself in that frame of mind, someone who hasn't been to college or conservatory or university, someone who's trying to figure out what to do with their lives, and all they're trying to do is get ahead.
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out what is the direction they should go, and how can they best move forward. And that is it's a tremendous privilege and responsibility that I am someone in a position to, you know, for them to draw on my experience.
So as a conductor, and I'm going to bring up it's a concept of mine, so bear with me, those at home as well. The concept of memory and the concept of DNA being kind of matched together as we grow. I think as a conductor, I'm sure there's a lot of music in your head that you know for sure. And then when you're at the helm, especially of something like CYSO, at a concert down the street, and they're throwing 110% in because there's a cultivated DNA in the organization. What memories in your DNA drive you to be the best you can be today? What memories in your DNA cause you to be this inspiration for so many around you?
You know, one that I think about all the time, I remember as a freshman in high school playing the fourth horn in a Mahler Symphony No. 1 with my local youth orchestra, the Rhode Island Philharmonic Youth Orchestra. And because we didn't have all the parts full in our section, I was playing in the last movement, bum 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 ba ba ba. I was playing up the octave because we didn't have all the parts covered, even though my part was written low. And this wasn't something I just decided to do. The conductor said, you know, anybody, if you can do it, you know, please do. But I missed a bunch of the notes, of course. And I remember telling my teacher after the concert how disappointed I was that, you know, I was really tired by the end and I couldn't really play it as well as I'd hoped. And she said, well, all I can say is don't worry about it too much because I'm pretty sure you'll get another chance to play it in your life. And that was a really interesting idea to me because I had no idea if I was ever going to play Mahler Symphony No. 1 again. And now, of course, looking back, it's a silly question, but I never did play it again on the horn. I played it on the double bass a number of times. I've conducted it now a couple times, but I never got a chance to go back on the horn and hit all those notes.
Well, I'm sure a lot of your students have redeemed those notes at this point.
Well, and having been through that experience, like that is honestly very much in the front of my mind when I deal with them, when I, first of all, you know, comfort them when they're not able to achieve what they'd hoped, but also am tough on them to prepare them for what's coming because I now have this benefit of perspective that only comes with age, where I see much better now what is really important. And when to beat yourself up and when to give yourself a break. And both of those things are really important. You can't just do all one and not the other.
Kind of piggybacking right off of the end of that statement, how did you learn to balance all of these things? Because we've been talking about you as a conductor, you at CISO as a teacher, but you're a human being like anybody else on this planet, and you have a life and it's a separate identity from anybody else. How do you balance what your life is and what your goals are.
You know, another thing I talk to the young people about a lot is the idea that where they are right now, there are lots of little achievements that they can gain to make them feel like they're moving ahead. There are lots of little awards, and every year they go to another grade, or you go to college, or you go to graduate school, or you get this summer festival, or that little short-term position. And there are all these things at their age to make you feel like you're still moving ahead, except once you get through college and you finally get into a job and are just working, what is the reason we do things when there are no more awards? You know, when there's no more attendance award, why do you show up every day? Yeah. When there's no more grade, why do you continue to do your best? And what I realized is that the struggle is the whole point. That I didn't realize when I was their age, that I remember thinking, okay, this is very difficult, and I would see people much older than me who did it much better than me. And it was a mystery to me how they got from where I was to where they were. And I just assumed, well, if I just keep going and, eventually at some point this will become easier and I won't have to try.
Yeah.
And what I realize now, of course, is the struggle is the whole point. The only reason to do this is because you want to be a little bit better at something every single day. And that's that's really what keeps me going now, and that's what is more fulfilling to me now than I could have imagined as a young person. Because now, if you want to be good at something, you find ways to make it more difficult for yourself. So that's what I started doing here. I started trying to learn my pieces more deeply. I started trying to memorize more pieces. I started trying my best not to repeat repertoire, especially after my first few years. It occurred to me that if I only play pieces that I already know, it's going to eventually become difficult to learn new pieces. And if I only play pieces that I don't already know, eventually I'll get really good at playing pieces I don't already know.
Right.
So it's things like that you learn along the way that make you realize the struggle is the whole point, and the true joy of this life is getting to live it every day. It's in the same way that our lives are nothing but the memories we amass as we're living it. The pieces we play along the way. I think a lot about, for example, the size of my repertoire in terms of the number of pieces I performed in public. There are, we all know certain pieces to certain levels, but there were many levels. And I did not realize as a young person how many levels there are and how deep you can go. And it wasn't until I was an adult working here where I realized every single piece you learn is an opportunity to go deeper than you ever have. And the only way you can continue improving is if every single piece you begin, you aim to go deeper with it than any other piece you've ever worked at. And the result is that it changes your whole relationship with the repertoire, which is why I don't have favorite pieces anymore, because it's all just it's just a different relationship than young people who only know a few pieces have.
You've just given me so much to think about, just in my own life. Since we are the Illinois Low Brass Institute, we should talk about low brass for a little bit.
Sure.
If you had a megaphone and a direct line to every high school tuba player's ear right now, or euphonium or trombone player, what are, I guess, 3 pieces of advice that you would give them when they look at the task at hand as a low brass player? Whether it's coming in and playing some Sousa marches, or let's go down and play some Bruckner 7. What 3 pieces of advice would you give low brass players right now thinking about and dreaming about sitting in something like CSO?
Make it powerful, of course, which is the first thing most brass players want to do. And that's, young brass players who aren't yet really making sound. I mean, that's the first thing I go to with young brass players is you have to make sound. You have to take a bigger breath. You have to use more air. You can't learn to make sound until you're making sound. That's how you learn to make sound.
Funny. Maybe if some of my students are watching this
Right?
is great advice.
You have to make sound in order to learn to make sound. And that sometimes causes me to let them occasionally go over the edge of good taste, and then I'll listen to the recording and think, oh my God, I can't believe I let them do that. But I know that's part of growing for young brass players. And the worst thing you can do is give them the hand every time you hear them do something that you don't like, because they don't learn to fix things, they learn to hide. So powerful, yes, but there are two other things that have to happen simultaneously that are equally important. It has to be beautiful, it has to be clear. And the clarity is the key. And I think of playing music in terms of visual art. You know, when you go to an art museum or an art gallery, you're there to enjoy some other person's art. And the only way you can truly enjoy that is if you can really see the art. Now that means that it has to be lit correctly. That means you have to be able to stand in the right kind of proximity where you're able to take in the whole work, but you're still close enough that you can see details. And what's even better is if you can move around and get real close and check out some details and then back up and see the whole thing, right? But the point is, this is someone else's art we're enjoying. And so the most important thing we can do is see it clearly. And the most important thing the curator can do is present it in a way that people can see the art. So when we play music, it's the same. It's like people playing music in a way that is sloppy is like showing people beautiful art behind a piece of dirty glass. And our goal as performers is not to use this art to make us look more important or special, which is what a lot of young people think is the purpose of this music. Our purpose as performers is to bring this art to people, to make it so that they can see the art. And so we have to clean all that filth off the glass so that people can enjoy the art. And that's why clear is important. When I listen to an orchestra, I look at the score and I've studied it, and you try and grow in your mind ideas of what this should sound like in real life. But really, what I look at the score and I listen to the orchestra, and when I see things I can't hear, that's when I go to work. Because our job is to bring the art to people, and that means they have to be able to hear all of it.
In my high school practice journal, I had on the inside cover written, "Make every note matter."
Make every note matter.
Make every note matter. Who cares how short, how soft it is? Who cares who else is playing it? Every note. Everybody's a part of the team.
And even worse is, what this person does and what that person does, and it's so easy to get so involved in what other people are doing with these pieces of art. It really doesn't mean a hill of beans. You know, we all are passengers for some amount of time on spaceship Earth flying around the universe. And at some point, we all leave the ship. And all we can do while we're here is to, try and improve the quality of the passage for our fellow passengers and for the passengers to come.
Well, as we close out, we have this tradition, and it's borrowed from this other organization I work with called the Tuba Euphonium Social Justice Initiative. And at each of our meetings, we close out by asking each other, what are we grateful for today? So I want to give you an opportunity to take care of that right now.
The first and foremost thing that comes to my mind is how grateful I am that we are here today at the Fine Arts Building. And we are not wearing our masks because it's after hours and there's no one else in the building, and we've got windows open, and you and I have both I'm 2 weeks into my first shot. You've already had your second shot. So I feel very safe doing this. And
it's a breath of fresh air, honestly.
Right. I'm so thankful for that. I can't think of anything I am more thankful for than than that I am here today still doing this, and that all of this still exists. A year ago when we went to lockdown, like many musicians, I think that non-classical musicians, non-musicians, people who don't know any classical musicians, really, it's difficult to quantify how difficult this time has been for classical music. I mean, the whole business of people playing music together in a space for other people has stopped dead for about a year, and the vast majority of our society doesn't even notice.
Yeah.
And that's very difficult.
It is difficult.
But it makes me feel what can I do besides redouble my efforts and make music even more important for young people to understand and to learn from and to grow from, and to be able to share this music with people who might already love it, and maybe they don't need me, maybe I could just help remind them, or maybe people who don't yet realize that they love it. And I don't think of people as classical music lovers and non-classical music lovers. I think of people as people who love classical music and people who don't know yet how great it is. And most of our society is people who don't yet know how great it is. And we're living in a really difficult time where it is increasingly difficult to get people to pay attention to things for more than a very small amount of time, without multimedia elements and all of that. But it's more important now than it has ever been. I am convinced, like many sociologists who are telling us on a regular basis, the alarm bells are going off. The way we use the internet now is rewiring our brains, whether it's social media or just having these black mirrors in front of our faces constantly. It rewires our brains in terms of the amount of focus we're able to give to things. And this is why I do almost no social media, and I'm really good at turning off my phone, probably better than I should be sometimes. I'm sure some people would say, who sometimes don't get an email back for days or weeks. But for me as a human being, it's incredibly important. I had a teacher who used to say, there's a reason we're supposed to be human beings and not human doings. Wow. Right? We don't.
Yeah.
Too many of us don't take any time to just be. And that's not to say be lazy. That means to appreciate where we are and notice things and not waste the opportunity to learn from the fact that we are here, and I can take a breath and I can, enjoy my life.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I'm grateful for also being here and to expand upon it. Like yesterday I was at Merit for the first time in person. And throughout the last couple of weeks, that window or that door that's been shut, that crack is starting to show itself. And the light's starting to come through. And I'm really hopeful for this industry. We've also faced a lot of our own demons, I would say. And I'm hoping that with the energy and the novelty of finally being able to come back and play again, that we bring a renewed sense of responsibility to what we are in the world around us. We're not just, like you said, things that do. We're people that are, and we're a part of the same thing. And so I'm grateful for my community, CYSO, Merit School of Music, Chicago Freedom Ensemble, TESCHI. It's been an incredible year, and I want to mark that it's been a year, and I think it's moving forward finally.
Akshat, I am grateful for you, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to people, and especially to young people who are trying to figure out how to use music in their lives to find even more fulfillment in this time. And No, I think you're completely right to end this way, that practicing gratitude is among the most important things. I have a number of times in our Zoom rehearsals that have happened over the course of the last year reminded the students about our last in-person rehearsal, which was March 8th, 2020.
Yeah.
And at that rehearsal, people were getting a little rambunctious. It was a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and high school students on a gorgeous Sunday afternoon in the middle of downtown Chicago. Like, it's very easy to lose your focus on the rehearsal and drift to what I'm going to do when I get out of here. And I said to them, pay attention and appreciate this, because I don't know if we're going to have this next week.
Yeah.
And I remember the looks on their faces. Like, for the most part, it was, sure. And some of them were thinking, my goodness, like, what if we don't have this next week? People were just starting on that day to get the feeling that was a possibility. But none of us I had never dreamt that I would live through a time where this would go away for a year like this. Yeah. So we got to appreciate it.
You got to appreciate it. Well, thank you so much, Allen. And thank you for everybody for watching. Again, this has been an ILBI Talk with Allen Tinkham. And I hope you will stay tuned for further content from ILBI. Take care.